If you wanted to make me the most productive person that I knew, what would you do?
Oh, I would tell you to go for a long walk and think about what you even want to be productive on. This is, I think, the thing about productivity is people think it's about doing more and more and more, faster, faster, faster. It's not. It's about doing the right things deliberately and with intention. So if you never take a step back, you never really move forward in the best possible direction. So it's like taking that step back, choosing where to go forward, and then cultivating the conditions after that: focus, having enough energy, managing your time properly. But that's a manner of prioritization. I'd say take a step back. You got to.
So intention, right? And so intention's a big part of this. Walk me through it.
Mhm.
Kinda what does that look like?
Well, intention is just a plan that we're going to do something, and that's that. I think such a beautiful faculty of this humanness condition that we're in. Right, we're always planning to do things, whether on autopilot mode out of habit, which is 40 to 45% of the day, or whether it's deliberately charting our course for where to go, which is the other 55 to 60% of the day. And so we're always doing something for a reason, whether it's because of a conditioned habit or whether it's because we're deliberately charting our course for where to go. And productivity is it's a mix of the two, right? So we have the habits that, like, if you have a habit to work out every morning and go for incredible, incredible, it's good. Don't change that. Habits can be powerful, but it's that intentionality where when we have the latitude, where we have the space to be able to be intentional in the first place, that is space that we have to use and take advantage of, because there's just an infinite number of things that we could possibly be doing in any moment. And that's the thing about productivity is when there's a limitless things of anything that you could be doing in the moment, right? Like right now, somebody's watching or listening to us chat about productivity. But in this moment, you could be doing 1,000 different other things, probably because you're using discretionary time to listen or watch this. You could be watching a different video. You could be going down a rabbit. You could be playing a video game. You could be calling up an old friend. You could be picking up a good book. You could be doing a million other things. Every moment of our life and our work is like this. And so when we have the space to be able to choose where to go, intentional is the very process through which we um, uh, work smarter instead of just harder on what's in front of us. And so it's critical. It's critical that we take that step back in order to proceed forward.
And I think when people take a step back sometimes, the problem is this. The problem is there's so many things they could choose to do. There's so many things they want to accomplish. It's like, okay, I want to get fit. I want to improve my relationship. I want to write a book. I want to improve playing the guitar. There's all these things. How can people effectively, productively, no pun intended, like intentionally move forward with what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, well, I think it begins with what currencies are you really after? If you're at work, are you after accomplishment? If you're in a personal context, are you after meaning? And so, what is it that you're trying to get out of the moment? And then you can go from there. If you want to accomplish more, that's easy. Meaning's harder, but if you want to become more accomplished, look at, like, just make a list of every activity you do over the course of the week and pick one. If you could only do one of those each and every day, day in and day out, which one adds the most value? Which one's the highest leverage? Pick a second, pick a third, then pretty much everything that remains after those three tasks. The marginal productivity is nowhere near as high. Our marginal productivity falls off a cliff after a few different tasks. So for me, it's writing, it's doing research, it's being in interviews because I can share ideas with people and stuff like that. It's creation mostly. But the things that support it, right? Managing my calendar, delegate it to someone else. So the things that are left kind of support the things that we do. Meaning is tougher. And that really stems down to what we value. Productivity, I think, is the thing. Productivity and accomplishment, I think, are the things worth optimizing for in a work context. That's the argument that I make. You might have a different path, and that's good. But I think that's what most people want overall. But meaning is a very interesting thing because values, first of all, are a very mushy topic, right? Yeah, you hear values, and what comes to mind for me are those BS. I don't know if I can swear on the podcast, so I'll just say BS. Those BS activities that like some corporate management consultant comes in, says these are 100 values on a sheet of paper here. Circle what you value most. Do you value humor? Do you value grace? Do you value this? There's no scientific backing in that whatsoever. But there actually is good hard scientific evidence on values and meaning, which says that we all have essentially 12 values that we all share in different amounts, from self-direction to accomplishment to pleasure and hedonism, just sense pleasure in the moment, universalism, which is doing things for the benefit of the world and nature, to security and power and face and stimulation, and there's essentially 12 of these different values. So by understanding which of these is most near and dear to us, we're able to look at what the options are of what we could be doing in the moment and think, okay, what is actually rooted in what I care about the most, that's nearest and dearest to me. So accomplishment, it's a matter of prioritization, meaning it's a matter of prioritization as well, but rooted in something deeper than just accomplishment.
So what are the most common values you see that drive people to be productive and also have, like, real meaning behind what they do?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because first of all, this theory of values, it's um, cross culturally relevant. It's the Shalom Schwartz theory of values. It's the one with the research behind it, essentially. And there are certain values that are more and less common overall on a population level. So power is one of the 12 values, whether it's resource power or dominating people. And that's one of the least common values overall. Some people have it in spades, and every organization has roles of different power levels. So there's a natural purpose of power, right? In any organizational system, we have hierarchies of organization of people and resources. So there is that kind of basic need for it, but it's quite low on the spectrum overall. It's my lowest value too. Um, one that's really high overall is self-direction. It's being able to go our own way, and I'd imagine it's for high for people of this podcast as well. So, being able to have that autonomy and that latitude to be able to choose where we go. Self-direction is relatively high. Achievement is relatively high overall. Benevolence also is quite high too. Being caring for other people is, and universalism is relatively high as well. So it's kind of nice the values that are high overall. They tend to be ones that benefit the groups that we're a member of. Benevolence, self-direction. I self-direction is my highest value. I have it in spades. Like if somebody tells me that I have to do something, it makes me less likely to do that thing because I just feel like I want to have control over my actions. So that's quite a high one overall. That's probably what's your feeling for what is highest for you?
I would say self-direction is pretty important because 'cause I'm a self-motivated person and, I wanna be able to, as an entrepreneur, like, kind of take control over what I'm doing. But I also think that that's I mean, that's gotten me in trouble at times, and it's also been an asset in that asking for help definitely is useful, right? Like, I wouldn't be where I am today if I haven't had help along the way. I love collaborating with other people, but I do like having a vision and being creative and staying disciplined to what I say I'm gonna do.
Yeah, and creativity is a huge, huge part of that. Another one that is high overall. I actually surveyed my own audience, and so it is like there's a selection bias problem there for sure, because these are people drawn to my work who are more likely to have my own values. But it's called hedonism in the research, which has quite sultry connotations with that word. It's just pleasure of the senses, right? Everything from the more sultry things, taking a bath or luxuriating in a good album. That's quite high overall too. And this is an interesting thing too, in terms of the motivation behind the intentions that we have, where some of the motivations are quite conflicted, right? Maybe we value self-direction and accomplishment, and so we really want to go our own way and develop our own fitness regimen and, build this body that we're proud of, for example. But then we value hedonism highly maybe as well, and that value of hedonism just makes us want to destroy the bag of chips that are in the cupboard and while we're ordering Uber Eats and stuff. And so we have these values conflicts too, that we have to manage. And so this is what I find interesting is when you actually look at the deep rooted research on intentionality. First of all, there's always a value driving whatever it is that we're doing, because it's a continuum of motivation of anything that could be possibly motivating us in the moment. But also, we have values that conflict with one another. So often the tensions that we're trying to manage in our own life are a manifestation of these values that are in conflict with one another. Like, you think of tradition versus self direction, for example. That's one that comes up in my own life. I'm less traditional, but a lot of the people in my life are. And so I want to go my own way, but other people have more traditional. That it's very interesting when you see the motivational bedrock behind your actions and the actions of other people. You just can't get this idea out of your mind of what is actually motivating what we're doing.
And I think one of the roadblocks people hit with, I mean, goal setting, behavior change, procrastination, the things we're talking about, is their life isn't that bad right now. Like, the habits are there, and there's some negativity, right? Maybe they're waking up, like, hungover more than they want to. Maybe they've, gained some weight, over the holidays, whatever the example is. But they're like, like, I'm not like, I didn't get a DUI, like, I don't have diabetes, like, what's the worst that can happen? Yes, so what I'm getting at is how can people develop a deep enough, like, meaning to change when, like, that pain of their life, like, isn't there yet?
That's such an interesting question because, and you think about it in terms of priorities in change, where the easiest way to tell if something's a priority for you is you've already done it, because it just feels like like our values are a natural extension of who we are. If you value self direction and you go your own way by doing something, you're going to feel as though you're expressing your nature. It'll feel natural for you. It won't have that effort that a goal sometimes feels. And what one interesting thing, I think, an interesting angle to come at that question from would be, one of the more surprising things about intention is, so an intention is just a plan that we're going to do something, and there's two kinds of intentions actually, and that surprised me in the research because you think intention, it's always deliberate, but it turns out that isn't true. Everything that we do out of habit, our brain just automatically forms that intention. It's more of a default intention of the mind. And so we wake up, our mind automatically forms the intention to get out of bed and make a cup of coffee. And so we go through these default intentions, 40-45% of the day. And we don't really embrace the defaults enough and consider how the defaults are aligned with the values that we have. And so often we set these goals that sound good in theory, but in practice are anything but. One example of this for myself is I love the idea of being an early riser, waking up at 5:30 and meditating and going for a run and reading the newspaper because I get the physical newspaper here in Ottawa every morning. Nice little ritual. And, I fantasize about this idea, but it's more the idea of the change that I'm in love with versus the day to day reality of what that change would actually look like in practice. Because in practice, it means having to go to bed whenever all my friends want to hang out. There's a good hockey game or something on at night. I got to go to bed at 9:30 if I want to get my 8 hours of sleep. And so you don't think about the day to day when the rubber actually meets the road with the goal. You think about the sepia toned fantasy idea of what it will be like overall. And so I think it's a matter of, we sometimes take the default intentions that we have that are producing these dividends for granted. Um, like the incredible habits we have already. We feel guilty about investing in some of our values. Like you mentioned hedonism in the question, right? Just indulging in a night having some drinks with friends or something. Um, there's that's meaningful. If you value hedonism and pleasure, that's a meaningful night, especially if you value benevolence and being with other people. So I think we tend to feel guilty about certain values when we shouldn't. I think there are some goals that feel sepia toned that are really just these fantasies more than they are a tangible change that we want to make to our daily life. I think we tend to be bad, like every goal that we have too. So I write a lot about goals in the intentional book. Goals, I think, are misunderstood too because they're not. They're not like a goal is just a prediction, right? A goal is just a prediction of where we believe our current and planned actions will take us. And so we let that prediction turn into an expectation for how things will go, and then we always end up disappointed because our prediction is never end up accurate. So it's a whole mess, you can see, of different things: the deliberate and the deliberate versus default intentions, the sepia tone goals, some values guilt, a little concoction for you.
So when it comes to procrastination and when people aren't, achieving the goal that they want, what's typically at the root of it? Is it the opposite of what we've been talking about? Is it the disconnection from values? Is it not setting yourself up for success? Like, what's going on when people procrastinate?
Yeah, so values are a part of it, but they're only a part of it. So the research shows that there's only one thing that causes procrastination, and that is aversion. So we feel aversion to doing something, and so we develop this emotional impulse to put it off. And so, just doing your taxes, for example, right? The thought of it puts you, yeah, I mean, just think about it, man. Like, it,
That's self-employment.
bookkeeping.
That's self-employment tax.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's they gotta make automatic tax filing a thing, in Canada and the US. But think of, like, just the aversion that arises in your mind when you think about doing your taxes or doing a DIY project around the house, or maybe there's, like, a closet that you need to clean out that you've been punting down the road for a later day. Aversion is that emotional reaction that leads us to want to put something off. And so you need to look at the science of aversion, which is connected a bit with the science of values, but the Venn diagram is like maybe 1/6 overlap. So the characteristics that make something aversive are whether something is boring. So the process of doing it isn't that engaging, whether something is frustrating, whether something is unpleasant, so it elicits these negative emotional responses, whether something is far away in the future. So the more distant something is, sign up for a marathon a year from now, you're probably not going to train now. You're going to start training when you feel the goal approaching, the wind of the goal in your hair. When something is unstructured, and so we just haven't mapped out a way to do it, we tend to just think about how the goal makes us feel instead of the very next step we need to take to make it happen. And the final trigger of aversion is when something feels meaningless, so it isn't connected with our values, which is really just what motivates us most. And so every single thing that you put off is some combination of that. So your taxes, they're boring, they're frustrating, they're often far away in the future when you put them off. It's unstructured. What are the next steps to doing that? There's not much meaning in giving money to the government either. And so we procrastinate because it has this, speaking of concoction, it has that concoction of aversive ingredients. And so it's aversion. It's aversion that leads us to put something off. But by looking at what triggers a task has, we can then deconstruct something in order to make it desirable to do, the desire being the opposite of aversion.
So let's deconstruct something that's a common thing that people put off. Talk about yourself.
What are you putting off right now?
It's not that I'm not putting off. I'm trying to think of what I'm putting off. I mean, I think maybe building out this. It's. I can't really say I'm putting anything. It's just more like, it's like, how would you define putting things off? Just not doing them, or
Yeah, not doing them when you really know that you should be. Wait, I'll come up with one. I'm putting up soundproofing in the corner of my office here, and this is a thing. By the way, that is interesting in the procrastination research is 99 out of 100 people openly admit to procrastinating on something. Pierce Steele, researcher from the University of Calgary, has found. So it's human, right? And it's just like, but this soundproofing corner, it's not like causing the emotional weight. It's just something that I haven't deployed these tactics on yet. And really, if I look at this for me, I don't know if this is an interesting example for somebody, but to me, this is very unstructured. So the path to doing it isn't clear for me. So maybe it'll look like asking ChatGPT, you are a sound engineer. This is a picture of the corner of my office labeled with the dimensions. And so it'll look like making a little list. Okay, take pictures of the corner of the office, mark up photos with the iPad with get the measuring tape, mark up photos with the measurements. And so, you see the path laid out ahead of you, in front of you, and then the resistance is it's not totally gone. It's there's still maybe a bit of boredom, probably not a lot of frustration or unpleasantness in that. But it's mostly unstructured, which would be setting that off for me. Doing your taxes, though, the one that you had an aversive reaction to, I saw. Um,
extensions always get filed over here.
Oh man, yeah, there you go. So one thing that works for me is I'll do the taxes with a glass of wine and order some Uber Eats. And so hedonism is my highest what one of my highest values. And so I find that making the actual process of doing it pleasant, very rewarding. And also sometimes I'll also give myself $1 for every minute I spend on them. So I'll essentially bribe myself into doing the taxes, and that'll lead there to be more pleasantness in the task to counterbalance the unpleasantness and the boredom at the same time. But might set off a different one for you. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like the unknown. It's like, what am I gonna owe? Am I gonna do this correctly? Did I pay enough?
Oh
Um,
yeah. How much am I gonna owe?
and it's just the frustrating thing of just being like, oh, like, obviously I'm grateful when I owe more because it means I made more, but it's still like, when you're self-employed and you pay self-employment tax, it's definitely a big reminder at tax time, like how much that is, right? Um, yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I tend to put off. I mean, I always try to file an extension just to give me more time to get things prepared and make sure that I can, not owe as much and make sure I have everything like checked off.
Yeah, and this is why, the $500 billion tax preparation industry exists in the United States, because it sets off all these attributes of aversion. It's kind of like a problem that the industry can solve for someone because it's so aversive.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so getting back to procrastination, I think one of
Yeah.
the common things that people can't do when they're procrastinating is they can't focus. Um,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
talk about like what is your position on what it means to be actually focused, and how can people become just like laser focused when they're trying
Mm.
to achieve a goal?
So my take on what focus is when and it's very much a research based take, so it sounds a bit dorky, but it's essentially being perceptually coupled with whatever it is that we're doing. So in other words, our thoughts are aligned with all of our other senses. We're locked in to what we're doing in the moment, and it just means we're completely at one with what we're doing. Whatever it is that we're doing, it feels like that's exactly where we need to be. And so That's tough to create the conditions for it, right? But so often focus, I find it to be a matter of eliminating all the other options that you could be doing in the moment except for the thing that you wish to be doing. So for me, for example, if I have my phone nearby, I'm a very impulsive person. Impulsiveness, by the way, is the character trait that's most highly correlated with procrastination. And so, I find that that's interesting too. As the heat, once you add the hedonism in, God help you. But what I find is if my phone is nearby, I'm gonna tap, I'm gonna swipe around on that. Even though I have written a book on focus, I've been deep into the research on focus, and I consider I know quite a bit about focus. I know the logical stuff, but then you can know all the logical stuff in the world, but then when you have an emotional impulse in front of you, you want to engage with it. That's what procrastination is. It's giving in to feel good, as the researchers call it. So it's really so I'll put my phone in another room. I'll put on a distractions blocker on my computer, which disables I usually don't disable email because I don't find myself distracted by that, but I'll disable websites like Reddit, and Instagram, which these, AI driven algorithmic websites, which just lead to even more I'll disable YouTube and all these different things. So in other words, in the moment, I disable everything that I could want to be doing more than what I really wish to be doing. And then it's just a matter of doing the thing once you get rid of all the other options that are otherwise.
So essentially, it's just putting up guardrails, right?
It is, and it's having enough of a self awareness to notice what your obstacles are in the first place. Because the thing about distraction is it's so easy to tame obstacles ahead of time, but in the moment, God help you if you see that some famous person reshares whatever of yours, then you're going to be derailed, right? And so it's really like doing the things ahead of time to set yourself up for the conditions and then creating the conditions, speaking of aversion, speaking of desire, to actually enjoy what you're focusing on. Because I think that's an element that isn't really talked enough about in productivity. So I think what a lot of people think of when they think of productivity is like something that is cold and corporate and all about efficiency and effectiveness and boiling your life down to a spreadsheet and stuff. But it's really it, it, it should feel good to be productive, right? We all have those days where we accomplish just a ton. We wrote thousands of words. We're at inbox zero. We hired somebody new onto our team. We're going into the weekend like boom, let's go. We all have days like that. More days should feel like that. That's the purpose of this stuff. It's not just to become an automaton of cold-hearted accomplishment or something. It's so creating the conditions to enjoy it. So, making a nice cup of tea beforehand and, putting on a nice playlist and, I don't know, lighting a candle for God's sake, whatever you need to do to enjoy what you're doing. As whatever latitude you have to do that can be really helpful too.
We will get you back to this episode of The Adversity Advantage in just 1 second, but first, I wanted to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Busy Gold and Predictive Mind. We talk a lot about self awareness on the show, and Busy has been on the pod multiple times where we've had amazing conversations about how to rewire your brain and create new patterns. So, if you've ever felt stuck repeating the same patterns, whether it's in relationships, decision making, or how you respond to stress, this ad is worth paying attention to. Brain pattern mapping is a structured assessment that helps you understand the early experiences that shaped how your brain adapted to the world. It gives you the language for the unconscious patterns that can influence your emotions, productivity, communication, reactions, and more. You'll get a complete online guided assessment that looks at early environmental inputs and adaptive behaviors. Then you get your results that are organized into core pattern categories. In your session, you walk through 9 key markers that show how your brain processes things like emotion, connection, and internal narratives. The result is a personalized behavioral roadmap, which can help you see where your intentions and habits may be misaligned and how to move forward with clarity and less friction. As you know, I love talking about habits and self awareness, and I highly recommend checking this out. And if you want to give it a try, go to predictivemind.io and use the code Doug15 for 15% off. Again, predictivemind.io and use code Doug15 for 15% off. Now back to the show. So self-awareness is so important because I think it's an important point because if we're talking about focus and productivity and all these things, sometimes people just aren't even aware of how distracted they are.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, is there a hack or is there a way that you found to kind of have that awareness around what actually distracts you?
Yeah. Yeah, one really helpful one, is an hourly awareness chime. So, if you have an Apple Watch or a smartwatch, it can tap you on the "Hey, there you
Just
go."
stand up.
An ultra.
Stand.
Alright, you're an ultra fella. There
Yeah.
we are. Let's
It
go.
always tells me how lazy I am. It's like time to stand. Oh man.
Yep. My rings, though we're recording this at 11:30, my rings are looking a bit weak right now. What are you at? Who's weaker right
Well,
now?
I have,
I'm probably.
I'm trying to be professional, so I have the actual like dial,
Oh.
but
Oh,
yeah,
I'm far less of a professional than you are. Um, so it's really, and this is something interesting. Yeah, the hourly awareness chime can be one. Doing kind of a focus
mm,
sprint can be another. So, how long do you want to focus on something? Set a timer for that amount of time, and then keep a little distractions list by your side. So, I always have a little notepad nearby. Now I'll be like jotting down little notes of things that I want to mention to questions you're asking and stuff. But otherwise, it can turn into a distractions list, and so anytime I want to interrupt myself or distract myself or feel tempted and impulsive to do something else, I'll jot it down. Then once the focus sprint goes off, you can treat yourself to an all-you-can-eat buffet of distraction, which is always nice. And so that I think is kind of key. A few things to bring some awareness to, but it really goes to this idea, and I write about this in the book too. Is what one of the most beautiful ideas that I've encountered in researching intentionality is this idea of our self-reflective capacity. And I love this idea because, first of all, our self-reflective capacities seem to be decreasing over time, where we have less time for introspection as we are surrounded, engulfed by more distractions and just more noise inside of our mind. I remember asking a monk in writing that book, where does intention come from? Where does intention come from? And he listed all the sources that you see come up all the time in the research, right? Our biology, that leads us to set intentions, right? We're on a road trip, we got to go to the bathroom. All right, next pit stop. I'm going to stop there. We set the intention. We have the desire to avoid pain and seek greater pleasure, right? Feeling lonely, we approach somebody and to ask them out on a date. So there's the biological needs. There's the things that we learn too, right? So we learn a lesson listening to a podcast or reading a book or listening to an audiobook. And then that leads us to look inward and then reflect on how to do things differently. But the final ingredient that he mentioned that isn't in the research at all, but that I really started to dig deep into is that idea of our self-reflective capacity, the ability to essentially ask questions of our inner world, right? How distracted was I today? What's the state of my attention today? How much energy do I have? How is that influencing how distracted I am? Is my focus a bit lower because I slept like garbage yesterday or I had a few drinks yesterday? How is this caffeine affecting my focus? Is it narrowing my focus or sharpening it? So we really need to develop this idea of our self-reflective capacity too, which begins with rituals like the ones that I mentioned and beyond, in order to be able to not only ask questions of our inner world, but consider what questions we should even be asking ourselves in the first place.
You brought up alcohol and caffeine. Like, what are some of the lifestyle habits that tend to wreck people's focus and productivity? As I'm drinking a Celsius here.
Well, alcohol and caffeine? No. So so alcohol is interesting with regard to focus because, the research shows that it has kind of a similar effect to dreaming in a way, or daydreaming, where when we have alcohol, our mind wanders more. So the proportion of our time our mind is wandering is higher, which is not a bad thing for creativity. But except for the fact that we become less aware of where our mind is wandering to, which kind of counterbalances the creative benefit that we get from doing it. So you gotta stay focused if you're having a drink and want to do something creative. So generally, it's not a great thing for creativity or focus, right? It borrows kind of energy and happiness from the following day. But caffeine is very interesting with regard to focus and performance. I actually keep my level of caffeine consumption quite low, because I want to be able to deploy it when I need it. So, I was having a little tea before we were chatting today just to, energize a little bit. Um, and, with the other interviews today and stuff, like, it's just nice to have a greater reservoir of fuel, of energy. So that I think is, and I think with productivity advice, we have to take what works for us and leave the rest. So take this if it works for you, but I really recommend resetting your caffeine tolerance. And not like nobody wants to do this ever, but I think the benefits of it can be quite interesting. So just wait until the next time you get sick, and then once you get sick, go cold turkey with caffeine if you feel that would be a good fit for you, because you'll ascribe any withdrawal symptoms you have to just being sick, a prolongation of whatever illness you have, because going off of caffeine, it feels like an illness sometimes. Um, but you'll notice that once you're on the other end of it, you'll focus with greater clarity. Usually, you'll have a more expansive focus, so you'll be able to connect more disparate information. You'll be able to, really zero in on something that you're focusing a bit less, though. So caffeine kind of narrows our attention. It puts blinders on, so we become a bit less creative, but we become more locked in to what we're doing. And so it's a very interesting thing to be able to deploy. Whereas when we consume it habitually, we get accustomed to whatever level of caffeine we're consuming, and then we no longer have that advantage that we can deploy on a whim. Um, so I find it interesting in that regard. And by the way, another interesting thing with caffeine is it affects introverts and extroverts differently. So an introvert, if they're giving a presentation and they have a big, 300 milligram cup of caffeinated coffee, they can be overstimulated and more stressed out by the situation. And so their performance declines. Whereas an extrovert, maybe not 300 milligrams beforehand, but depends on how much you consume, I suppose, generally. We all metabolize caffeine differently. But an extrovert having a cup of coffee or tea before a presentation, that can fire them up and stimulate them to a good level. I'm kind of in the middle, so I find a nice cup of green tea is nice. So that benefits me. Yeah.
So I've heard people talk about that addiction can be like a problem with instant gratification. And obviously, I know you're not an addiction expert, but I want to talk about instant gratification, which I know you study, and this is something that's part of what you talk about. How can people get better at instant gratification, like that urge to do something they know they shouldn't do, or they know that's probably not going to make them more productive? Is there anything you personally do that where you get these urges or where you don't cave into instant gratification?
What I personally do as someone who's quite impulsive, so food is my weakness. And so I'll order, if I'm traveling for work and I can expense it, I'll order like a massive sushi at dinner, just like more. and they put in like 2 sets of chopsticks and stuff, which
Uh-huh.
always but I love a good sushi meal, man. But what I've started to do is really be mindful and reflective. There's the reflective idea again of the point of diminishing returns with this stuff. And so, there's this idea in economics mostly of diminishing marginal utility, where if you want to eat like a bunch of chocolate bars, first one's going to taste amazing. Second one's going to be like, kind of all right. Then the third one's gonna be like, "Okay, I'm done with the chocolate now." Fourth, you don't even wanna think about. And so there's this curve of diminishing marginal returns where the first little sushi roll will taste amazing, little California roll, let's say. Then you go to the spicy salmon, and that tastes amazing too. But then you start to feel out this curve of, okay, how much actual, uh, enjoyment, how much utility am I extracting out of this experience? And so I start to feel this curve in my mind, and usually you feel it cresting, and then low, 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 and then once it starts to lower at a more rapid clip, that's the point at which I stop. And so it's really this tactic. I think of it not as a way of curbing impulsiveness, but as a way of optimizing for how much enjoyment I can get out of that experience. And I think you can extend this to more impulsive things like social media, for an example. Um, 'Cause social media is, I would argue, in any dose is more poison than it is a nice sushi roll. But it's really cluing into how different apps make you feel. And so this, I think, is something else we're not connected enough with. And there's this battle between logic and emotion so often that occurs. Procrastination is when emotion wins out over logic. The impulsive decisions are when these moment by moment impulsive emotional decisions outweigh whatever logical goals that we have. So really stepping back from the apps on your phone in a little logical sprint, right? Setting aside 15 minutes and going through your apps on your phone and considering, how does each of these actually make me feel? Like when I fire up Instagram, what do I feel? Like, I don't know if you've ever swiped to the wrong screen and you accidentally fire up your selfie camera. Like, we never have this ear to ear grin on our face. We're always kind of like zoned out and kind of looking glum and stuff. Um, Notice how apps make you feel, because we tend to these apps by choice. So why make yourself feel like shit by choice? It makes no sense. Just because something is stimulating for the mind doesn't mean that it makes us happy. And the science of stimulation usually says the opposite. The more stimulating something is, the more it can lead us to procrastinate, the more it can lead us to become, seek out more dopamine hits just the same. And so really clue into how these apps make you feel.
Are you friends with Cal Newport? Do you know Cal?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's a buddy.
So are you under the same like theory as him, where he like doesn't use social media?
I use it. I use it. Because there are friends that I keep in contact with over social media. My publisher makes me use social media. Makes is maybe too strong of a word. Highly encourages me to use social media. So I use it, but I don't really tend to it throughout the day. Yeah.
So is that like your biggest, piece of advice or hack for people, is to develop like awareness around their phone? I mean, just given how much stimulation it can provide people. Because you can have the deepest meaning in the world. You can be super connected to your goals. You can have it all outlined, but like if you're just every 5 minutes scrolling, like it means nothing, right?
Yeah, and that, I think, is the issue with social media is our phone and the distractions that come with it. They fill up the little cracks of our day like water, right? And what that does is it drowns out all these little moments that we have for self-reflection. So, we talk about intentionality. It's by stepping back that we choose where to go. If we don't have these moments where we're actually stepping back, we're just becoming more automatic. We're just becoming more stimulated. We're just becoming more miserable. We're just becoming more envious and depressed and all the things that come up, even when we're tending to things that are like stimulating in a funny way or something. We tend to relate to those differently over the long term. They stimulate our mind rather than calming it down. And so I really think noticing how they fill the cracks of our day like water, that can be a big thing, and giving yourself no choice but to uh, untend to them. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what about discipline? I think that that's also like a cousin of productivity, right? Is people want to be disciplined. They want to like be consistent. How can people become hyper disciplined? Anything. Let's just say take somebody who's not a disciplined person. Like, how can they develop and build discipline? Let's just say somebody hasn't exercised in like 20 years and they're like, okay, I need to start exercising. I need to start walking. I need to start going to the gym, but the habit's not there. Um, how can people do that?
I think the key. So I forget who said this. I wish I could give her credit. I think it was Mary Oliver. Somebody once wrote, I'll just say, that how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And I think that's the key with understanding discipline is for your life to be different, your days have to be different. And so discipline is really, I think, a matter of understanding the exact ways that you want your life and your days to be different and for there to be no air between those two things. So, it's the sepia tone goals idea again, right? Where we have these grand changes that we want to make to our life, but we're disconnected with the day to day reality of what that'll actually look like. So I think that's the key to understand is you need to understand the exact ways your life and your days will be different. And then you can go into building your days around that very idea because there will be alignment with the change that you're seeking to make and the discipline that you're looking to introduce. I also think when it comes to discipline, we're often, you know, pretty hard on ourselves when we're endeavoring to accomplish something. What one rule that I love, my friend Laura Vanderkam, another writer in the productivity space, she writes that 3 times a week is a habit. And I love this rule. And it works in both directions. If we're developing a good habit 3 times a week, if we're lifting weights, incredible. 3 times a week, ordering Uber Eats or having drinks with friends or something, that's a habit too. So it works in both directions. So I think initially, when you're developing the consistency around something, which consistency, discipline, I would equate with pretty much being the same thing. Look to the days, look to the life you want to create, look to the 3 times a week as a habit, easier to fit something in. And then as you form that 3 times a week habit, really look for ways to make it enjoyable. Enjoyable. Discipline doesn't have to be some, you know, hard grinding thing. It should be enjoyable to go to the gym, right? Treat your gym like a spa, right? That's the best way to make it more enjoyable. Hedonistic, right? Just make it more luxurious, these changes that you're trying to make. That can be a key thing to behavior change, especially if you value pleasure.
What's your stance on morning routines? Do they matter?
I don't, I don't know that they do. I don't know that they do. So everybody has a different desire for structure in their life. And so maybe if you really desire structure, you might love your morning routine. But it's interesting. I mentioned the 5:30 wake up experiment, which I've done a few times because I love the idea of it. The research actually shows that there's no difference in somebody's socioeconomic standing based on what time they wake up at. So people that wake up at 6:30 or 4:30 are these monsters. Um, no offense, but you're a bit of a monster if you wake up at 4:30. If you wake up at 4:30 versus 9:30, people who do both just as successful as one another. It's what we do with the hours of our day after we wake up that make a big difference. And I really think, it's really that it comes down to that deliberateness, that intentionality. If you intentionally want to invest in a morning routine one day, and then the next day you have a first meeting in the morning starts at 7 a.m. with Europe or something, and so you just want to spring out of bed and throw on a dress shirt and sweatpants and get on a Zoom video, and then you do that's great. The idea is the intentionality behind it, I think. As long as there's intention behind what you're doing, you don't have to worry about much else.
What are some other like big myths you see in the productivity
Oh.
space?
Oh man, so the waking up early is one. The caffeine, actually, the caffeine connection to performance, I think, is interesting, because caffeine can make people more anxious than they realize, which reduces our working memory capacity, um, and compromises our attention. But it can also really support our attention. Attention is in other ways. I think the idea of like hustling all the time is another one where, hustle, I think, is the idea of it is great, just work all the time. But sometimes going for a walk will lead you to accomplish more than hustling all day long, right? Think of a CEO where they have 10 meetings one day, but say, screw it. Then they go for a walk. And on that walk, they think of an idea that completely changes the direction of their company. And, it's $1 billion walk. That's more valuable than 10 meetings usually, right? And so I think the idea of self-reflection is critical, and tapping into that through wandering. I think wandering is also a really underrated way of becoming more productive. Wandering is sometimes a luxury, right? Because it means that we have discretionary time to be able to use to just let our mind roam free, whether it's for a walk or a run or a workout or whatever. Uh, but wandering, I think, is a highly, highly underrated um, activity for becoming more productive. We don't feel productive when we're wandering, but just think of the $1 billion walk, right? We all have the equivalents in our own work and our own life. So the idea of our self-reflective capacity might be an underrated one. The wandering, the waking up early is BS, unless it works for you, right? We all have different chronotypes, and so work with your own chronobiology. And the idea of actually, I'd come back to values too, because values are often talked about, but not in a way that's scientific, which bothers me, because when you look at the science behind values, it's beautiful, and it connects to our motivational core of who we are as human beings. And it's hard to look at things the same way, but there's so much fluff about values out there too that we should probably be ignoring most of it. And so I'd say the fluff about values too might be another myth. In a way, in a way.
Michael Easter, are you familiar with Michael's work?
I know the name. I couldn't pinpoint the work.
Comfort Crisis. He wrote the book, and he talks about like boredom used to be like a good thing back in the day, and now it's seen as something like you just said, like wandering is something that's like kind of like negative. If you don't have anything to do, it's seen as like, okay, I'm not being productive, I'm not working hard, FOMO, like all the things. How can people like reframe that like for the long term to just knowing it's okay to like stay in one night and just have peace to yourself? Like what's the reframe there?
Yeah, because nobody wants to be bored, right?
No.
I remember doing a productivity experiment one time, to purposefully make myself bored for an hour a day for a month, to experiment with boredom. So day 1, I read the iTunes terms and conditions. I waited on hold with Air Canada's baggage claims department, all these other things. And really, boredom is a shortcut to a lower level of mental stimulation. Boredom is the name for the restlessness that we feel when we're going from a higher state of stimulation down into a lower state of stimulation. And so I think that's the key to understand, is whatever it takes for you to get to a lower level of mental stimulation, you'll get these benefits, right? You'll become more in tune with that self-reflective capacity, because your moments of the day won't be, drowned out like the little cracks in the sidewalks like water. um, Meditation can help you get there. um, Dopamine fasting, which we can't really do, our bodies can't fast from dopamine, but eliminating the more empty stimulating sources of dopamine that we have can be an effective strategy for a period of time. It takes our mind about 8 days to settle into a new lower level of mental stimulation, the research shows. Our vacations, in other words, need to be at least 8 days long. So meditation is a way to get there. Dopamine, quote unquote, dopamine fasting is a way to get there. Being bored, if you want, for a little while, but doing these activities that don't fill your attention to the brim. Reading a good book and putting your phone in a different room can help you lower your level of stimulation. Doing simple doing some journaling, right? These activities that are a bit less stimulating, that are less novel, in other words, because it's really novelty that is the factor that's at play behind the scenes with boredom, where we're really adjusting to a new level of novelty, right? That's what propels us forward when we distract ourselves. So there's this novelty bias embedded within our brain's prefrontal cortex, the logical part of our brain, whereby for every new and novel thing we direct our attention at, our brain gives us a hit of dopamine. And so, in other words, we wake up, we go to Instagram, we get a hit of dopamine. We check email, we get a hit of dopamine. We bounce around in these dopamine loops. And when we go without the novelty, right? When we read the iTunes terms and conditions, or just paint, or go for a run, or go for a walk with listening to classical music, or just listening to a good album, whatever it might be, do things that are less novel in the moment, and you'll get the same effects as being bored. Meditation is my favorite shortcut for lowering the level of mental stimulation. I love my meditation practice too, so I'll add that to the mix.
Chris Bailey, thank you so much for coming on the pod, for sharing your wisdom. You got a new book coming out. Where can people find out more about that and your work?
Yes. Oh man. So this book, and we were chatting before, I don't say this with every book. Intentional How to Finish What You Start is the name. Easily the best thing I've ever made. It may be the best book I ever made. Maybe I've peaked, Doug. We'll see. But that's where you can find it wherever books are sold, January 6th. chrisbailey.com for my newsletter and podcasts and stuff. My podcast is called Time and Attention, if that's your thing. But there you go. Yeah, good to be here with you, man.
Likewise, man. Love this combo. I think it's going to help people get 2026 off to a great start.
Oh, love it. Love it.
Disease is, not caused by, but is oxidative stress. It's biomolecules inside your cells losing electrons to toxins and getting oxidized. You need to eat the best foods you can and digest them as best you can. The important thing that I feel in a diet is to combine foods correctly, because when you don't food combine correctly, you have poor digestion. So if you're high on calcium, low on magnesium, oxidative stress inside that cell is going to directly impact the mitochondria.